Hi friends, welcome to this latest episode of the Nationalist View, and today we have with us a very special guest, Ms. Joanna Lillis. Joanna, thank you so much for joining the show.
Hello, Arun. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a great pleasure to be back on the Nationalist View.
Yeah, thank you. So Joanna is a journalist, with decades of experience, especially in terms of reporting on Central Asia. She has written two wonderful books. One is called Silk Mirage, which is on Uzbekistan, and one is called Dark Shadows, basically, which is on Kazakhstan. If you are a student of Central Asia, researcher of Central Asia, journalist, or if you have, even if you're planning to visit Central Asia as a tourist, these two books are a must read, wonderful read. I have read both of the books, and we have spoken about this book in our earlier podcast also. And I'll be sharing the link of that podcast with you. So today we are going to talk about a few things which are happening in Central Asia, and we'll take, Joanna will take us through these developments. So, Joanna, my first question is that the Kazakh president, he has recently concluded his visit to Pakistan on February 4th. So, what is the significance of this visit? Because a day before that, on February 3rd, there was an intergovernmental meeting between Pakistan and Uzbekistan also. And Pakistan has been positioning probably itself as a gateway for Central Asia, which is largely landlocked. So, what is the significance of this visit of Kazakh president in Pakistan?
Yes, indeed. So the Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has been in Pakistan over the last couple of days, and this is a very interesting visit. And I think it signals something of a pivot south, you might say, for Central Asia. Which has always looked more north towards Russia, more east towards China, and more west towards, Europe. So I think it's an interesting visit, and it chimes very much with what we're seeing across the other parts of Central Asia, and of course with the way in which both the Central Asian countries and the countries of South Asia, so Pakistan, India, seem to be forging new links in recent times. Let's say over the last maybe year or so. I think that's really stepped up, and I think that's it's very important. I mean, in Pakistan, President Tokayev's been discussing improving rail connectivity, obviously boosting trade, which is kind of minimal, considering that these countries are pretty much regional neighbors. That's the kind of thing that is on the agenda, and I think it works in favor of both sides. What Kazakhstan is really interested in here is forging some kind of rail route southwards from landlocked Central Asia, to the ports of Pakistan. And obviously there are certain challenges towards that, not least that those routes will have to go through Afghanistan. But those are the kind of things that they are talking about. And it's very important to note that, Central Asia being landlocked, all the countries are landlocked, and even Uzbekistan is even what's known as double landlocked, as in it's a country with no access to the sea, and it's surrounded also by other landlocked countries. So this kind of efforts to forge routes southwards and to improve relations between Central and South Asia, I think they're a bit of a game changer for this region. So I think it's certainly something that we should be watching. But of course, we have to say that security issues, the security situation in Afghanistan, all of those things present challenges to cooperation.
So, you talked about security situation, and we've talked about Pakistan. Now, Pakistan and China are close allies. So I'll move on to another aspect, that because you have, I think, probably written a piece in your Substack about this, that, in Kazakhstan now people are facing long-term prisons for anti-China protests. And so what does this tell us about China's, influence, especially in Kazakhstan and, some extent Central Asia? Also, we had talked about it a little bit last time also, but now, what exactly is this incident, and, what is the implication of, this sentence which has been given, such a long prison sentence?
Yes, I mean, this is a very important trial, I would say, for Kazakhstan. And the fact that it involves China is absolutely crucial. to this case. China, of course, being a major ally, as you said, for Pakistan and also a major ally for Central Asia. In this case, we're talking about Kazakhstan. So let me briefly sort of recap what this trial is all about. Basically, the people on trial, there are 19 Kazakh people on trial in Kazakhstan at the moment, and they are charged with an offence called inciting ethnic discord, and this relates to a protest that they conducted, an anti-China protest that they conducted late last year in Kazakhstan. As a result, they found themselves facing these very serious charges. I mean, this is not just about holding what they call in Kazakhstan an illegal protest if you don't have permission. It's not related to that. It's related to very serious charges, and they carry a 10-year prison sentence. To give some background here, one of the women on trial who I have interviewed, her name is Guldariya Sherizat, and her husband is under arrest in China, and she doesn't know why. He's been given a 2.5-year prison sentence, and she doesn't know why. Now, these people are all Kazakh citizens. In fact, the people on trial were all born in China, but they've moved to Kazakhstan under a government scheme that kind of attracts Kazakhs from around the world, gives them citizenship to come and live in Kazakhstan. But these people have all been drawing attention, and indeed their protest was not just about the arrest of this woman's husband, but also about the general human rights situation in Xinjiang, the province of China that borders Central Asia, borders Kazakhstan. And there, it's very well documented, and we've seen this in the international news for several years, that minorities, Turkic Muslim groups, including Kazakhs, but the bigger group is the Uyghurs, have been facing massive human rights abuses. China denies this, of course, but they have been subjected to incarceration without trial in re-education camps and suppression of their cultural and religious practices. So this protest near the border with China, not in a big city, and now they're on trial facing these serious charges. Now, what's notable here is that these charges were brought against them immediately after China sent a diplomatic note to the Kazakh government expressing their concern about this protest and demanding appropriate measures. And they talked about how a group in Kazakhstan, which is called Atasher, had been undermining the Sino-Kazakh alliance by sort of its lobbying. And what that group does is lobby over human rights abuses in China. So what does that tell us? Well, it's worth pointing out that Kazakhstan as a government is not in any case tolerant of public protest. However, the fact that this group, even though they had already been charged with a minor offence and fined and given a few days in prison, some of them, that incident had already been dealt with by law enforcement. But after China intervened, they found themselves now suddenly facing 10 years in prison. Now that tells us that China's influence is massive. And that it is willing to intervene in the internal affairs of the Central Asian governments in order to suppress what it sees as anti-China activism. And indeed, this is anti-China activism. So it tells us that China has influence over the governments and the law enforcement and judicial processes that go on. China is very determined to get its way and to make sure that the Central Asian governments toe their line if they want to retain their important political and economic alliance with China.
So we'll move on a little bit towards, that there are two questions which I'm combining. So one is basically, we have seen recent clashes on the Tajikistan-Afghanistan border. So it's suddenly in the news with, shootings, drug smuggling, Taliban-related tensions. So, and on the other hand, the Russian defense minister recently said that Afghanistan and Central Asia are now a major security concerns for its military bloc, what it called the CSTO, which is, so how do you look at this whole thing, and how Afghanistan especially, is becoming an increasingly important factor in this whole situation?
Yes, I mean, now this instability on the Tajik-Afghan border, there has been a spike in this kind of instability lately. And actually, it also involves China, because many things in this region do involve China. Well, how does it involve China? I mean, two of the attacks in December that took place, cross-border attacks from Afghanistan by unknown gunmen. Two of them were targeting Chinese workers who are building roads in Tajikistan, working on a gold gold mine in Tajikistan. So it's all about Chinese investment. And in fact, some of the work has halted because of the security situation, because, Chinese workers were killed in those attacks. So we are seeing a spike in instability. We don't know the exact reasons. I mean, the Taliban themselves have said that they believe that, there are forces, rebels trying to undermine the Taliban's attempts to collaborate with its neighbors and undermine its ability, to forge relations. Of course, targeting China as well is important there. So that's what's happening there. We have, so this is important for Central Asia. We're seeing a spike in instability. I mean, it's not spreading to other parts of Central Asia. These are remote areas. But, people are dying. Tajik citizens are dying. People are dying. Tajik citizens are dying. Chinese citizens are dying. And of course, Afghans are also dying here. So it is important. Now, it's also attracted the attention, as you mentioned, of Russia. So we've talked about China being a very important geopolitical partner for Central Asia, political, economic, geostrategic, all of it. But Russia is the other giant in this region when it comes to geopolitics. All the Central Asian states have very close relations with Russia to varying degrees, but Russia is a major, major player. In fact, Russia and China are right up there at the top, and nobody rivals them. And so Russia paying attention to this and talking about this instability on the Tajik-Afghan border as being a threat to its military alliance. The CSTO, that's the military alliance, as you mentioned, the Collective Security Treaty Organization. And in that organization, there are Russia and basically a number of its allies. Belarus, that's on Russia's European borders, in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and also Armenia in the Caucasus. So those are the members. And this CSTO was set up many years ago, and it kind of positions itself, if you like, as a sort of Russian answer to NATO. However, it's kind of on a practical level, it's not really it's not really a regional NATO. There's a lot of security collaboration between the countries within the CSTO and military collaboration. However, when push comes to shove, the CSTO has not usually stepped up to address regional security threats. Of course, it does have programs to combat terrorism, drug trafficking, and militancy in the region. But when it comes to major incidents, the CSTO has, on only one occasion, intervened in a conflict or in an incident in one of these countries. Now, that happened in 2022 in Kazakhstan when there was major civil unrest. Now, this was not an external threat, although the president tried to paint it as such by saying that there were 20,000 terrorists involved. It was a complicated situation. It's known as Bloody January in Kazakhstan because so many people died, 238 people. And this was, not exactly to quell the unrest, but to come and guard strategic facilities to free Kazakh troops up. Now, the CSTO is Russian-led, so many of the troops were Russian. This was the first time the CSTO had ever intervened in another country, in one of its member states. In fact, it had previously declined requests for intervention when Armenia, was in conflict with neighboring Azerbaijan in 2020 and 2022. The CSTO refused to intervene, but it intervened in Kazakhstan. Now, interestingly, that was just a month before Russia invaded Ukraine. So, there must have been many political and military and strategic considerations at play. But that's what the CSTO is. I mean, we've seen that one intervention, but we definitely see it as a big cooperation forum for these states when it comes to military and security issues. But as I say, it's not got the heft or it's not got the heft of a kind of NATO in the region.
My last question is, Joanna, that now Russia being too busy with the Ukraine war and China deeply embedded in Central Asia, especially economically, geostrategically, as you rightly mentioned. So going way forward, and the recent visit of this Kazakh president to Pakistan, the Tajik Afghanistan clashes and spillover of Taliban. So, how do you see days unfolding for Central Asia? What is the way forward in terms of, is it becoming, a theater of a new great game for major competing powers, especially given, the kind of mineral wealth and the geostrategic positioning it has?
So, yes, I mean, I think we're definitely seeing a major intensification of rivalry over Central Asia. And we can date that back to Russia's invasion or full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And that's when we really started to see this intensification, although Central Asia has always been the subject of certain competition. And here, I think the reason is that, first of all, there was increased competition over transport routes after Russia invaded Ukraine, because there was a search for alternatives to routes going from China towards Europe and the West without going through Russia, because, economic players were looking for different routes to avoid risk. And that placed Central Asia at the forefront of, new routes going towards the West from China. But we're also seeing intense competition, as always, over energy resources. It's an oil and gas rich region. Currently, most of the gas goes to China. The oil goes west. It goes, it goes all kinds of places, also to China. But we're seeing a lot of competition over that. And we're also seeing a lot of competition in the last few years over critical minerals. Now, that's obviously something that's a relatively new kind of competition. And Central Asia, is home to many critical minerals, and it's at the heart of all that. And I think, Russia and China are at the forefront of this this competition. People, sometimes call it a new great game, referring back to these kind of 19th century competitions over Central Asia. People in Central Asia, of course, don't like that because they see themselves as agents here and not as kind of subjects of competition. But we can definitely see this intensification. Russia and China have always been, China has been present, increasingly its presence since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Russia, of course, considers this region its backyard, which is another thing Central Asians don't like to hear. Now, you mentioned whether Russia is too distracted by its war in Ukraine. Of course, it's got a lot on its plate, self-inflicted, because it invaded Ukraine. However, we still see massive Russian presence, activity in the region. And I think it's still got its eye very firmly on Central Asia. It's still working to try and keep Central Asia in the fold. And it's using mix of carrot and sticks. We see threats. We see Russian shock jocks talking about how Central Asia shouldn't be independent. We've seen in the last few weeks these Russian kind of commentators, aggressive, militaristic, nationalistic commentators talking about how Central Asia should become the subject of a special military operation. That's the words that they use for war, the war in Ukraine. So we're seeing a lot of aggressive tactics, and we also see the carrot as well. Russia trying to coax Central Asia to remain in its fold, using soft power or its economic partnerships and security partnerships and so on. So I would say that Russia is not too distracted to keep on playing this game in Central Asia. And of course, we should add that we've got other players joining in here. We've got, Turkey, it has cultural and linguistic affinity with 4 of the Central Asian states, Turkic speaking, except for Tajikistan. And it's, so Turkey's trying to, increase its power here. We've got the Gulf states working to increase their power. We've got Europe constantly visiting and working on partnerships and energy partnerships and green hydrogen partnerships and all kinds of things. And we've got, as we've discussed, South Asia. We've seen India, more contacts between India and Central Asia. Now we've got Pakistan. And we should also, of course, last but not least, America. We see America very much wooing the Central Asian states. It held a summit with Donald Trump, with the presidents last year, and we've seen a number of states doing this. We saw China doing it last year, the European Union, and so on. So lots of states or blocs are doing this. And recently, Donald Trump invited the presidents of Uzbekistan, President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, and Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, to be on the board of peace. Now that's a big, let's say, not an olive branch, but a kind of gesture to say that, we consider you important partners. Now, obviously, we can talk very much about what that Board of Peace is, who's on it, and what it means. But for the Central Asian, if we leave that question aside and look at it from the Central Asian states' point of view, it's kind of like they've arrived at the table. Donald Trump is giving them, a seat at the table, and for them, that's very important. So, America's power is I would say, on the rise here because of all that. And these two presidents, Uzbek and Kazakh, have also been invited for the first time to take part in G20 this year by Donald Trump in Miami later this year. So we're seeing a lot of geopolitical competition over Central Asia right at the moment.
Thank you for this. We'll end this conversation here, and we hope to have Joanna Lillis back on our podcast soon again. And thank you, Joanna, for taking time out from your busy schedule and sharing such deep insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arun, and thank you to the listeners too. It's a pleasure to be on The Nationalist View.